Shigeru Miyamoto once said, "The obvious objective of video games is to entertain people by surprising them with new experiences. As an interactive medium, the experience is directly influenced by the player. Their actions are catalysts for the story, and the surprises baked into them by the creator. Instead of movies or TV shows where they passively take in a story, they're living it, forging stories with the characters within the medium." My name is Kane, and okay, that's enough of that for now. Hello everyone, I'm Kane, and on occasion I play games, and today we're taking a look at one of gaming's finest explorers of not only medium but genre as well, Remedy Entertainment. I had the luxury of experiencing the connected universe of games for the first time over the past few months, and today I will be discussing 4 of them with you. Firstly, we'll talk about Alan Wake via its 2021 remaster, via a combination of the Epic Games Store on PC and on PS5. Secondly, we have the 2012 spin-off game, Alan Wake's American Nightmare via Steam on PC. Thirdly, we have 2021's Control Ultimate Edition on the PS5. And finally, we have 2023's Alan Wake 2 via the PS5. These 4 are the only games that I could confirm are a part of the Remedyverse officially right now, so we'll be sticking to them. We'll discuss each of them, give them the score out of 10, and then rank them on a tier list because, well, that's what people do these days. Oh, and spoilers for the games in this video if you weren't already aware. While I do try to avoid major plot points, due to the connected nature of these titles, it might make it hard to avoid a lot of things. With that out of the way though, let's get into the first game, with Originally released in 2010, Alan Wake follows a fictional author by the same name and takes place in a small Washington town by the name of Bright Falls, a dream vacation destination that quickly becomes a nightmare for the writer, as what was supposed to be a trip to help with his writer's block quickly descends into a horror story made manifest by the mysterious paranormal entity that inhabits the area, corrupting it with darkness. One thing that will become apparent with Remedy's games as we go on is that they are excellent at setting the vibe and feel of their games right off the bat, and Alan Wake is no different. The tutorial of Alan Wake is a dream sequence that sees the author chased by a shadow through the wilderness after hitting someone with his car that doesn't die. During this, a mysterious deep-sea diver bathed in light guides Alan and teaches him how to defend himself against the shadows. This not only gives the player a good understanding of what to expect throughout the game in terms of its gameplay, but also the story, with the game's reveal of the tutorial being a dream putting its validity into question, the reliability of Alan as a narrator being called into question on multiple occasions throughout the narrative. The early game sees Alan arrive at Bright Falls with his wife Alice to stay in a cabin, but they're intercepted by a strange old woman who gives them the keys to a cabin on an island in Cauldron Lake. They get there, Alice reveals that his trip was to try and help Alan with his writer's block, and Alan gets angry and storms out, giving the darkness an opportunity to attack, dragging Alice into the lake. Wake then dives in after her but blacks out before waking up in his crashed car, somewhere completely different, and with no memory of how he got there. I love this setup to the game as it makes you as the player question everything that happened thus far. You're now back in the darkness again with the shadows and the diver. So was the situation at the lake cabin real? Is this another dream while Alan is dying in the lake with his wife? Or is it all real? Things don't get much clearer when Wake begins finding pages to a manuscript called Departure, apparently written by himself, but he doesn't remember doing so. It also talks about the events he's currently experiencing, placing him inside his own horror story as more information is trickled in. The shadows hunting him, they are the people of Bright Falls possessed by the darkness called Taken. And after defeating the landlord he was meant to meet, now a tough Taken that moves at incredible speeds, he calls the sheriff for help and tells them about the cabin on the lake. Except there isn't any cabin on the lake, and they all think the hit on his head from the crash made him forget. They even show us the blank lake, bringing Alan's memory into question even more, an idea which never really left my mind throughout the entire playthrough. The mystery continues to develop, with Alan determined to find a way to get his wife back from the darkness that has trapped her within the lake. On paper, Alan Wake seems like it would fit nicely into the survival horror genre, but I'd hesitate to call it one. While it certainly shares a lot of the DNA you'd expect, it isn't exactly overt in its horrific elements, instead feeling more like a mystery/thriller, much like the books the fictional author writes, which makes sense given the plot. The narrative is what Alan Wake prioritizes above all else, which I think works in its favor mostly. The pacing of the game is perfect, with an episodic format that not only lends a wonderful charm to the game, having it play out like a book or a TV show, but gives a perfect stopping point for players, letting them experience the game in smaller chunks. I find that to be the best way to experience this game, as the actual gameplay loop of dealing with Taken gets pretty repetitive. Shine a light at them to break away the shadows and then pump them full of bullets. Some enemy variants such as the Puddles of Darkness, crows, or haunted objects don't even require the bullets and just need lights. The controls are also weirdly floaty, especially on the PC version which you're seeing now. Wake awkwardly glides across the environment and objects he's trying to jump over. The dodging is mostly fine, but not perfect either. Sometimes it feels like you get hit despite the dodge, and other times you get hit multiple times and aren't allowed to move or dodge. This got quite annoying during my playthroughs. There are also 2 DLCs for Alan Wake, bonus episodes that continue the story after the main game concludes. And as for as interesting and as important the story implications are, I found them to be pretty mediocre experiences that focused way too much on the combat, the weakest part of Alan Wake. Just a jarring and pretty uninspired change of pace and tone from the main game. Alan Wake's strengths are its incredible story, world, and characters. The highlight of course being Wake himself, played by Finnish actor Ilkka Ville as his model, with Matthew Peretta voicing him. There are also added bits of world building sprinkled throughout the game, with radio broadcasts from Pat Main at KBF-FM, and live action television episodes of Night Springs, a hilarious Twilight Zone parody that I made sure to watch whenever I saw one. Finally, I want to talk about the music. The soundtrack for Alan Wake is wonderfully moody, with songs playing over the end of episode screens that I didn't skip once the entire playthrough. I listened to them the entire way, decompressing from the chapter I just experienced and taking in the story beats. It made the game flow so much better to me and allowed me to forget about any major frustrations I had. Honestly, if I didn't want to make this video, I think I would have loved playing Alan Wake like a TV show, coming back for a dedicated episode a week. Alan Wake is a game that has its flaws for sure, but much like the darkness you encounter, it's easy to look past them with the bright shining lights of its positives. The game is relatively short, clocking in around 11 hours for the main story according to HowLongToBeat, but it's a time that I think you can justify pretty nicely, even without going for the 100% completion. The mystery of Alan Wake is just so engaging that, much like the author's books, you likely won't want to put it down for long so you can learn more. I give Alan Wake Remastered an 8 out of 10. Putting it squarely in the A tier of our list. Now let's move on to... Adrenaline. In my soul. Every thought runs out of control. Do it all to get them off their feet. Wise words there from Downstate's entrance theme for WWE superstar Cody Rhodes, but unlike that American Nightmare, Alan Wake's odd spin-off can't quite live up to the hype. Released in 2012, Alan Wake's American Nightmare is a spin-off title that, while considered canonical from what I could gather, whether or not it's essential is debatable at best. The game takes place inside of an episode of Night Springs, the Twilight Zone show you can find broadcasts of in the original game, and is focused around a showdown between Wake and his dark doppelganger, Mr. Scratch. Scratch is an embodiment of the dark place and representative of the toxic parts of Wake's personality. If you've played the DLC from the first game, Alan Wake's American Nightmare really doesn't add much to the story, outside of being more time spent in this world and the battle between Wake and Scratch. It really serves as a strange bottle episode, something which will become a bit more obvious as we continue. I think if you're a fan of the creative process that Remedy implements into their games, however, Alan Wake's American Nightmare is a great stepping stone that lets you see more live action implemented into the main story, with cutscenes and more plot-relevant broadcasts that show Wake and Scratch, while giving Ilkka Ville a chance to flex his physical acting prowess a lot more. My issue with Alan Wake's American Nightmare though, well, its story and gameplay loop are just not that good. Scratch, wanting to escape the dark place, has trapped Wake in an endless loop, and Wake needs to escape. Cool concept on paper, but it just kinda sucks in execution. Doing the same thing over and over again by design can be good, especially when there is an engaging enough reason behind it, with enough interesting twists to keep it fresh, but this has neither. The story and characters outside of Peretta and Ville are completely bland and devoid of life. Wooden dialogue, a visually boring series of locales, and the evolution of the cycle essentially just boils down to skipping steps. Nothing really changes until the final cycle. To top it all off, this game has a lot of sections where it expects you to fight for Taken, and because of its release so soon after the original game, the combat is still lacking badly. I ignored most of the enemies and just sprinted my way through the entire game. The loop at the center of Alan Wake's American Nightmare can be broken down into 3 acts. Act 1. Alan Wake finds himself in Night Springs within the Dark Place and sees an oil derrick spewing out darkness. With the help of a mechanic named Emma, he collects items needed to perform a ritual to stop the darkness at the oil derrick. He turns a valve, switches on some blinker lights, and plays a Kasabian CD, which then somehow causes a meteorite to hit a satellite, causing it to tumble to Earth and smash into the oil derrick, destroying it and letting Wake run away to the tunes of Clubfoot by Kasabian. No, I'm not kidding. Act 2. Alan Wake goes to an observatory and meets a Dr. Rachel Meadows, helping her fix an imaging array to receive a signal that Scratch had also tried to get before him. A common theme of this game is Scratch causing mayhem with Wake's face. This section had a lot of combat, but he eventually gets the signal only to find it's partially complete, and then he moves on. Act 3. Wake goes to a theater where a darkness-afflicted woman called Serena tries to seduce him, thinking he's Scratch. To save her, Wake goes to the nearby transformer yard, turns on the power and the lights, and then she reveals that Scratch is trying to do something in the projector room, and he has sealed it off with darkness. Wake fights his way in, performs a ritual with the instructions he got in Act 2 via the signal, but because it didn't work, he's sent back to the beginning of Act 1. If you haven't guessed, the loop is so Wake can get the full signal across each iteration, so he can perform the full ritual in Act 3 and take out Scratch for good. Each loop he streamlines the process, which is appreciated, but the end result is ambiguous, with Alan Wake defeating Scratch, but also being trapped in the Dark Place anyway, making the whole thing a little pointless. I do want to point out that there are TV broadcasts to find around the game, all showing Mr. Scratch mocking Alan and being a creep. These are probably the best parts of the game, mainly down to Ilka Veli's physical portrayal of Scratch, which blends with Beretta's voice perfectly and makes a whole new perspective of the character. Alan Wake's American Nightmare was an experience that I don't necessarily regret, but one that I can't say I really enjoyed much at all. There are few positives to take from the experience, but hey, at least it's short, around 3.5 hours according to HowLongToBeat, for the main story, though I sped through it at 2.5 hours because of how boring it was. Bland, uninspired, and unessential, with the only redeeming factor being Veli and Beretta, this game I'd only recommend if you want every drop of this universe. I give Alan Wake's American Nightmare a 4 out of 10. Functionally fine, but more negatives than positives that keep it from hitting the upper half of the scale. This game slots in the D tier. Not worthy of being put in the bin, but certainly not good. Now that I've lost my mind playing this game, let's take back Taking place in the same universe, but mostly separate from the events of Alan Wake, Control sees players controlling Jessie Faden as she infiltrates the Federal Bureau of Control to find her brother who was kidnapped by the FBC after an altered world event in their hometown of Ordinary. To best describe the FBC, think the SCP Foundation but less nightmare fuel and militant forces, and more spooky vibes and red tape bureaucracy, though the reality warping threats to the world are still very much here. Much like the beginning of Alan Wake, the beginning of Control is absolutely insane. Jessie infiltrates the FBC's home base, known as the Oldest House, guided by an entity that might be the player in some kind of weird fourth wall break. Jessie meets Artie the janitor, who directs her to see Director Trench, the man in charge. Jessie approaches his office but hears a gunshot before running in and finding him dead, presumably having shot himself. Jessie then, for some reason, picks up the service weapon just used to shoot the head of a federal organization, leading to a weird vision, and voila, we're now the director of the FBC for some reason. Jessie then discovers that the FBC has been infiltrated by a paranormal force known as the Hiss, which has possessed most of the staff and turned them into mindless slaves. Some agents who were wearing specialized equipment called HRAs are okay though, and together with Jessie, they agree to take care of the Hiss, though Jessie really just wants to find Dylan. Control's story is a bit of a weird one for me. Part of me loves it and how weird it is, but I can't help but feel like it's also a bit of a confused mess at the same time. While it tries its best to explain everything and make it all make sense by the end of the game, I don't think it does enough when it comes to leaving the trail of breadcrumbs for the player to follow. I found myself disinterested with the main story on several occasions. I like Jessie Faden as a character, but she doesn't really grow or evolve throughout the game, and the mystery wasn't paced or balanced enough to engage me consistently. By the end, while I appreciated the reveals and twists and thought they were cool, I was left thinking it could have been a lot better. The lore of the world, meanwhile, is absolutely killer. I never once got bored of finding the various documents, files, and videos scattered across Control. The Oldest House's weird combination of corporate office and MC Escher painting was great to explore as well. It felt otherworldly at points and looked incredible. The only issue was the map was pretty much useless throughout the game, leaving the Oldest House feeling like a Backrooms game before the Backrooms exploded in popularity. As someone who loves the supernatural side of the world, even if I don't personally believe in any of it past being a cool story and part of human culture, Control hit all of the weird and trippy vibes that I wanted it to. Nothing demonstrates this as much as Remedy's use of multimedia in the game, projecting live-action video of Director Trench over the gameplay to drop bits of lore and give Jesse messages in the fight against the Hiss. Combine that with the tapes of Dr. Casper Darling that you find throughout the game and the incredible heavy metal powered rampage Jesse goes on, and you have a super stylish experience that you aren't likely to forget, even if the story doesn't satisfy you as much as it should have, like it did for me. There is also a post-game DLC that directly ties Control into the Alan Wake series, and while it provides some fun, spooky vibes that I liked a lot, I just wasn't overly invested in the story or any of the characters outside of Jesse, Artie, and of course Alan Wake for the glimpses we saw of him. It's almost exactly the opposite to Alan Wake when I think about it, because while I wasn't blown away with the story of Control, I found its combat and gameplay to be a lot more fun. The service weapon is the only one you'll get in Control, but it has multiple modes that you can unlock and switch between for some variety. Jesse also has a variety of psychic powers at her disposal throughout the game, such as launching projectiles, levitation, dashing, and shields. Is it original? Not really. Anyone who's played a Star Wars game knows that, but man, it was fun. The projectile throwing especially. I barely used the guns because I liked throwing stuff that much. Some of the action sequences were a little too long, and a lot of the enemies and bosses were overly spongy, which made things a bit tedious, but for the most part it was still a lot of fun to just dash about and throw boxes at people. The lack of quick saves did mean that I had to do things a few times though, which made it a little bit more tedious too. The puzzles in Control, however, are all bangers, the perfect combination of thought-provoking and interesting to keep me engaged whenever they appeared, even when other aspects got a little frustrating. My personal favourite were the motel puzzles, which see Jesse transitioning to a different dimension that looks like a motel, and solving a puzzle in the various rooms to unlock the way forward. The cue pattern matching puzzles were also great. At its core, Control is a game that feels like it's style over substance, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Everything about it is very cool and artsy, from the live-action projections to the musical sequences that made my jaw drop. Control is a work of art, and while I didn't enjoy the narrative side of it as much as I would have liked to, I can still appreciate it for what it's trying to do. According to HowLongToBeat, Control is about 12.5 hours long if you just straight shoot the main story, but I'd recommend taking it a bit slower to enjoy the world and do a few side quests while reading up on all the lore. I give Control a 7 out of 10. Really solid, but it could have been better balanced with the style of the game often overshadowing the characters and plot. That being said, I'd still recommend it to most people, especially those wanting to go into Alan Wake 2, as there are lots of elements that are directly related to that story that you should really check out first. I'd definitely pick up a sequel if and when that gets made too. As for the tier list, well, it's going in B tier. Now on to the next chapter. Let's talk about... A sequel over 13 years in the making, Alan Wake 2 finally continues the story of our favourite tortured writer as he battles against the forces of darkness. Most sequels that take this long are doomed to fail, stuck in development hell, and pushed out the door before they're ready. Alan Wake 2 is different. Remedy waited until they were able to make the game they wanted to make, focusing on other titles like Control in the meantime, and I'd argue this paid off massively. Alan Wake 2 is Remedy's magnum opus, a product that has taken their unique multimedia style developed over the years and perfected it to the point where it's not only assisting the narrative, but actively enhancing the gameplay experience. It's a complex horror story, but one that never lost me and kept me thoroughly engaged with its mystery as it developed, much like the original game, but enhanced in nearly every way. In this video, I've talked about the original game and Control, discussing their strengths and weaknesses and how they kind of reflect each other in my eyes. Alan Wake 2 takes the best parts of both of them and makes a stronger game overall because of it. Alan Wake 2, unlike the other Remedy games we've discussed, is actually split across two protagonists. The first of course is Alan Wake, and the second is FBI agent Saga Anderson, who is brought to Bright Falls alongside her partner Alex Casey to investigate a murder and the cult that were responsible for it, ultimately being dragged into the horror story that Wake has written. While this divide did stop Alan Wake 2 from having the perfect pacing of the original game, it more than made up for that with the unique gameplay elements that both Wake and Saga have for their chapters. Saga's gameplay is arguably the more standard survival horror experience of the two, so we'll start with her, and honestly, I hope we get another game with her, or at the very least, her mechanics. Saga's chapters mostly revolve around solving various mysteries she's dragged into. She does this by entering her mind palace and putting various clues on a caseboard to help her make deductions. These stem from finding collectibles, talking to people, or profiling them. Another section of the mind palace that sees her psychically reach out to people who are hiding information from her, presented with amazing live-action projections similar to those found in Control. Saga is trying to solve the mystery of the horror story she now finds herself in, chasing leads about the cult through Bright Falls and the surrounding areas, solving puzzles, and fending off Taken as reality distorts around her thanks to the Dark Place. Alan Wake's chapters, meanwhile, are a lot more surreal and psychological horror, with Wake trapped inside the Dark Place. It's centered around a talk show which sees a lot of live-action cutscenes of a very confused Wake, and that amazing musical number chapter that everyone has seen now, probably the greatest thing I've ever played in a video game. The other half of these chapters sees Alan Wake following the story of another book he doesn't remember writing, called Initiation, which sees him trying to escape the Dark Place with the help of his fictional detective, Alex Casey. We'll get back to that. All while a supernatural cult that worships Scratch hunts him down. Wake travels to various scenes from the horror story, finding echoes of Casey pondering or questioning suspects, which he then uses to add writing prompts to the scenes in his writer's room, instantly changing the entire world around him to open new paths forward. What makes Alan Wake 2's story so special, however, is how the chapters and stories intertwine with each other, such as the situation with Casey, and you're gonna have to hear me out about this, because this is gonna get a bit weird. So in the first game, we hear about Alan Wake's books and the fictional detective Alex Casey, who resides within them. In this second game, we are immediately introduced to a real Alex Casey, played by a combination of Remedy's Sam Lake and the late great James McCaffrey. Then, in Wake's chapters of the same game, we are not only introduced to a fictional version of Sam Lake, who plays the movie version of Alex Casey, but are also then introduced to the fictional detective Alex Casey, who looks and sounds identical to the real Alex Casey, who is suspiciously similar to the fictional one in terms of personality as well. Yet in Saga's chapters, we also find Alex Casey lunchboxes that are based on the Alex Casey movies, in which Alex Casey is played by Sam Lake, the actor who we see in Alan Wake's chapters, who looks identical to the real Alex Casey. So is Alex Casey real? Is he another manifestation of Wake's work? Is any of this real? I don't really know. And that's just the tip of the iceberg here, and it's why I love this game. This stuff happens constantly throughout Alan Wake 2. Of course, we have the return of manuscript pages that tell the horror story and alter reality, and we actually get to see this happen in real time, as Saga's reality changes around her, with her family being put in danger via the horror story and her questioning what's real. It takes the awesome mystery of having an unreliable narrator from the first game and literally doubles down upon it with two unreliable narrators in our two protagonists, and I loved every second of it as I tried to piece together what was coming next. It took what was good about the first game and escalated it while improving upon its flaws. Flaws like the gameplay, which has had a complete overhaul from the original title to better fit with the modern survival horror game you'd come across in 2023. More specifically, Alan Wake 2 plays a lot like a modern Resident Evil game, with the characters controlling similar to the likes of a Leon Kennedy, with an inventory system similar to that of Resident Evil 2 Remake specifically. As a huge fan of the Resident Evil series, and especially Resident Evil 2 Remake, this change was right up my alley and made me feel right at home with the changes. Honestly, the only complaint I have is that I should have played it on PC, as I much prefer these kind of games with a keyboard and mouse, but I chose the PS5 for the better graphics while capturing footage. This did make boss fights more difficult, but honestly that's mostly down to me being an idiot and not getting the hunting rifle ever. I completely skipped that weapon. Overall, Alan Wake 2 is a game that I would recommend to anyone who is remotely a fan of horror, or just enjoys seeing the artistic limits of video games and how creative developers can get. Visually stunning, incredible world-altering, genre-hopping and multimedia-infused gameplay that is so unique, all wrapped together with what is easily the most gripping narrative of 2023. According to HowLongToBeat, Alan Wake 2 will take you around 18 hours if you straight shot the story, but realistically, you're looking at 20 plus, and it didn't get boring once across the entire time, so I have to give it a 10 out of 10. This game blew me away, and it has established Remedy as a must-buy developer in my eyes. I am fascinated to see where they go next creatively. As for the tier list, where else could this go but the S tier? So damn good. Now that the games are over, let's get to the wrap-up. So we've done it, the 4 games of the Remedyverse reviewed and placed onto a tier list like the one you see on screen. If you're looking to give the universe a go, I'd recommend dropping American Nightmare and sticking with the main trio of Alan Wake, Control, then Alan Wake 2. I may not have liked the DLCs for Alan Wake 1 that much, but they are better than American Nightmare, and honestly cover everything that game has to offer anyway. What I will say though is make sure you play Control before Alan Wake 2. While it isn't directly connected outside of some references in the DLC, the bits of lore from that game are vital to experiencing Alan Wake 2 in my opinion. They really enhanced my experience. Having never played any of these titles before this video, Remedy Entertainment's connected universe of video games surprised me with how creative and different it is compared to your average gaming experience, especially within the action, adventure, and horror genres. I think if you're someone looking to broaden your horizons a bit more in terms of what games you play, and you like the idea of a supernatural horror and thriller, this should be a series of games you go out of your way to play. Thank you all for taking the time to watch this video, a bit of a new format here and one I'm interested in exploring a little bit more with different series going forward. Maybe not even stick to video games and try other forms of media. May even redo some previously done series to give them another look, but we'll see. By the way, if you like my content, be sure to check out my Twitch account KanePlaysGames_ and my TikTok account KanePlaysGames for streams and other random unscripted stuff. You may also see games that eventually end up here. I've been Kane, and I'll see you all soon.